But our next guest is Calvin Dark. He's a political commentator and a strategist. We're going to go over to him to understand more of his perspective, what the Washington eye is on this entire situation. This is also all the while as we continue to play for you live visuals of the Prime Minister meeting with different leaders on your screens. All right, let's go over to Calvin Dark right now. Calvin, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Calvin, good morning from here in India. I know it's a different time where you are. Calvin, I want to start by asking you this. If we cut through much of the clutter that's been written about this meeting, and if I were to try to reduce the goals for both countries into just a single sentence, tell me if this sentence is appropriate and how you would change it. If I said that what both Modi and Biden are trying to do is build a balanced security architecture in Asia, how would you edit that sentence? What would you add on to it? How would you explain to our audiences what both of these leaders are hoping to achieve with this meeting?
I think that sentence describes it all. The only word I would add would be China, specifically China. Obviously, that is included in improving the situation economically and militarily in Asia. But we know for the Biden administration, how to counter China on several fronts is a very, very important objective in this visit. And so I think we'll see whether it's, through increased military or economic cooperation and political cooperation, because the Biden administration understands partnerships in the world matter, not just with China, but with Russia and with the war in Ukraine. I think that is what we will see as kind of the main thrust of this visit from the American perspective.
Okay. Calvin, I want to understand from you, could you paint for our audiences how the American media is covering this? I know the American media is not one giant behemoth. There are different voices. Can you walk us through politics on both sides of the aisles? What more liberal voices in the Democratic Party are pushing Biden towards? And what the Republican voices in, of course, the Republican Party are pushing Biden towards in terms of what they want from these 3 days?
Yes, I think that most importantly, what I mentioned with China, countering other influences, you're going to have major parts of both parties who are going to be focusing on that. But now when it comes to the media, when it comes to what the politicos are saying, the biggest storyline here is the human rights issue, to be frank. And the reason why that's such a big issue is candidate Biden really, really emphasized that he was going to make promoting human rights at the center of domestic and foreign policy. Now, what we've seen since he became president, as with other examples with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, realpolitik has kind of intervened a little bit. And so you're seeing a lot of pushback that Biden isn't taking a more aggressive stand on human rights. And the nuance with that is it's not that a visit by the Indian Prime Minister shouldn't happen. I think most Americans would agree that should happen. There's this important relationship that we have with India. It's the state visit, because let's remember, this will only be the third state visit that President Biden has had. It was France, and then South Korea was the other one. So the human rights issue is going to be something that people are going to be talking about in the media. Something that's going to be talked about a little bit less, but what I find interesting politically is we are coming up in an election year. Election season has already started, and the Indian American voting bloc is increasingly more influential. And, if trends continue as they have, Indian Americans tend to vote Democrat. So obviously, there's a political benefit for President Biden to have this visit. Now, for Republicans, there are a lot of Republicans that think that the Indian American voting community is gettable, as we say, that they can kind of change that. They believe that their policies towards business, entrepreneurship, their socially conservative values should, in theory, appeal to Indian Americans as well. Let's keep in mind that on the Republican side, 2 of the candidates for the Republican nomination, are of Indian descent, have Indian parents. So I think those are some of the things we're going to be seeing politically after of course, countering China and increasing the military and economic ties.
I want to ask you, Calvin, the Ukraine question, and by that I mean the way in which India's position on Ukraine is looked at on an international stage, where we know, at least the way that we cover it here in the Indian media, is that there has been a push of sorts on the Indian side to take a firmer stance when it comes to the Russia question. And India has, again, in the way that we portray it, stood fast on its decision to continue endorsing Russia in some ways, to also maintain that relationship with Ukraine. Are we going to see an American pushback of sorts in that area at all, do you think?
Yes, I think we will. Now, how much of a pushback, that remains to be seen. I definitely think that's going to be a major thing that comes up when the two leaders meet privately. Also, something that is very particularly American, which I'm sure many people around the world realize this, is that when there are conflicts like what's happening with Russia's invading of Ukraine and the war that, Putin started, we kind of have a you're either with us or against us mentality. And that tends to overflow to who helps those who are fighting against us. And I think that, especially with the address to Congress, there's going to be a congressional push, I think, from Democrats and Republicans that, because India is such an important ally, that there should be no sunlight between the positions of our two countries when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. So it'll be interesting to see that push, how public it will be, and then what will be the prime minister's response.